We're also polite and kind. None of us wants to go first. Thanks for having us. Thanks for having us. We haven't actually had a chance to think about what we want to say. So bear with us, and I hope my fellow panelists agree. We can all say a little bit about our work, and really we want to hear from you, the audience, what you would like to know, and then we'll talk to that.
Yeah.
Go on, you first.
Hello. First of all, thanks for having me here. So I'm Pramudith, as introduced by the announcer. So I've been working as a humanitarian for last 20 years in Africa, in East Asia, Europe, and some, the Pacifics. Uh, but in 2022, I retired from my humanitarian work, but way before that, I took the pen and started writing about human stories. So I'm a published novelist, and I have written 3 novels, and most of them are set, away from my motherland, Sri Lanka. But at the moment, I'm working on a work set in Sri Lanka.
Yeah. So I'm Alvin Pang from Singapore, and the thing perhaps I would like to share about myself is I've been emerging for the past 30 years, I suppose, as a writer. I've got books all over the place, but uh, it's still a meaningful term, emerging voice, because I come from a society and perhaps even a region where there really is no such thing as a full-time writer, right? We have all had to embrace different professions in order to make a living, even as we pursue writing. And I mean, there's a whole tradition of doing that in our cultures, right? And I'm, for better or for worse, I'm one of those I've been a civil servant, I've been in the Singaporean version of the administrative service, I've been a journalist, I've been in advertising, and now I'm a consulting editor working on public policy issues. But I've always also been a creative writer, mainly a poet, but also an essayist. I finished my PhD a few years ago, so I've got some scholarship as well. I do some translations, and I also take photographs. And perhaps one of the interesting things we can talk about is in our communities and our cultures, what does it mean to emerge or to always be emerging? And actually, what does it even mean to be a voice in a society where the temptation is to always put you in a box, right? You are this thing or you're that thing, but we're actually many things at once.
And there were also very many Asians,
Absolutely.
which, unfortunately, the gatekeepers are still the Western publishers, right? And many Western publishers, when they have one Asian, could be North Asian, Southeast Asian, East Asian, they can't tell the difference. So they have one person, and that's enough. And the thing that really gets me is person of color. Do not call me a person of color. I mean, there's more of us people of color than there are the person who is not of color.
They
Do you
should
know?
be colorless, and
Yes,
then we're just
exactly.
people.
Exactly. This is the thing. And this is what I've always kind of tried to push even when I worked as a reporter. I was reporting for CNN and Al Jazeera. I was in the Middle East, in Iraq during the war with Saddam, and I spent a year there. And at that point, I was working with CNN, and what they tended to do, because I was of ambiguous ethnic definition, they would send me places where the Americans couldn't go. So it was like, you go, because they're not sure if you're Lebanese or perhaps some other sort of Middle Easterner, or maybe you're kind of Asian, but no matter what it is, they like Filipinos. So if it comes out that they know you're Filipino, they like you. Because the Filipinos were, cleaning hotels then and already working in their medical healthcare services. So it helped then to kind of be ambiguous. But what I liked about it was the fact that because I was ambiguous in that sense, they can't put you in a box. And when they can't put you in a box, they take you for what they see. And that's when you're just a person. Because it's either they like you, they don't like you, they think you're funny, they think you're not funny, you're maybe a little shy, but they're not basing their judgment of you on what they think your race is. And so that worked very well for me as a journalist because every time somebody asked me, where exactly are you from? I'm like, why does it matter to you? And then it became this long game of, but no, but really, where are you from? And it's like, but why? Why do you need to know? What difference will it make? Because you speak English, but you speak English a little funny, so we can't really place it. And then your name is kind of weird, and there's all these things. But I like that. Because then you take me for what I put out there, and you judge the story based on the people I am reporting on, not on the voice that you think I am reporting on the story with. Do you see what I mean? Sorry, I've totally sidetracked. But then, so I did that for like 25 to 30 years. And then it really was just an escape because I was too afraid to write books, which is what I always really wanted to do. So when I finally took a break from the news, I started to write the first novel that I'd been wanting to write for a few years. And basically, a lot of the work that I do, I have 4 books out now. 2 are fictional, 2 are non-fictional. One is a collection of essays from my time as a journalist, but it's not your typical, it's not a memoir, it's not a biography, but it's a look at the stories that I saw when I was on the road, be it in the war or in floods and whatnot, and the humanitarian aspect from all of that. But in terms of the fiction, it's also still tackling a lot of the real issues that we deal with in a fictionalized way. So you kind of put it in coating that people are better able to swallow than they might if they just watched it on the news. So that's the kind of writing that I do. And all of it with a little bit of a sense of humor because you gotta laugh, right? So.
After such, can you hear me? Yeah. After such illustrious careers, mine sounds really boring. Became a lawyer and then I left legal practice because I needed to look after my parents. And while looking after them, because they're aged, I used that free time to pursue my passion, which is writing. And I have a few works of fiction, and this is the latest collection, which is published by Penguin. So my stories are mostly based in Malaysia, but even in the context of Malaysia, which is where I'm from, I focus on Northern Peninsula, Malaysia, in my hometown, which is a small, very small town called Alustar, and it is 1 hour south of, you didn't know? 1 hour south of Thailand. So there, even within the small peninsula, my stories are different from other Malaysian authors, because most of them write about Penang, Malacca, or mostly Kuala Lumpur, urban. So that's where my focus is. And I find it's emerging, and it's mostly a privilege to be a writer, because I get to tell you my story in the way that I wish to be able to tell you the story. So I feel fortunate, and that's my story. So what's next? Why did you say, Alvin, why did you say, oh, you're from Alustar? What?
No, I think it's very cool.
First
No,
time.
and I think it speaks to what has emerged is a very interesting thread here, because on one level, we're all quite accomplished and experienced in our own fields. But on the other hand, I was just thinking before we came here, what does it mean to be emerging? It doesn't necessarily just mean young or new or so on and so forth. It could also mean that we are trying to put forward a voice that hasn't been heard enough. And I think that is true for all our work.
Yeah, but one common thread about my stories, which I find, is that those who read it and absolutely enjoy it are those who themselves come from small town. Where when I say small town, I mean small town. You can go, you get in the car and within 15 minutes you're finished. You've done Alustar. There's hardly very much to see, but it's the one place in the peninsula where it's completely flat land. So when you read about from other Malaysian authors, they write about Penang, they write about undulating terrain and so on. There's no such thing. I always tell this story. When we had to learn how to drive, you have to do that gradient. In Alustar, there's no such thing as a gradient. We had to make one to pass the exam, the cemented thing that you had to go up and come down, with the driving, because there is none. So, and there's no other person I know who's writes about Alustar. So that's, in that way I emerge. I bring my little world into yours.
I have a question for all of you, since we're all from this part of the world. How do you feel about writing in English? the fact that we're all technically writing in a language that many readers particularly will look at us and go, that's not native to you. How do you, yes.
For me, actually, I started writing English first of all, so, and I do write in French as well. But for me today, I don't think that I go back to those olden days and perceive English as a language that belong to somewhere else. It's a language that we own,
Right.
you know, and we have our own alterations, and we have put our own bits and pieces into that, and we write in that language we call English.
Right.
And I think I'm comfortable writing, but in the language that is familiar to me, that has bits and pieces of my native expressions, the way the perceptions, and then that has Latin letters, English words, English grammar, plus some percentage of the things from my environment.
Um, your question was about why we write in English.
No, not why, but like, how do you feel about it? Like,
How
the
do I feel?
perception is that it's a language foreign to us and we're taking it on, right? But like as he said, yes, I'm the same. Where you think in English, so in a way, it is our own. In
Yeah,
that
it
sense.
is our own, and even in these stories, one of the challenges that I had was to write in authentic English for a Malaysian, and to do a very simple example. It's not racist. So one of the things is the word chinky. You know, if you come to a Malaysian family, an Indian girl, it's a very personal story. My cousin got married, and I asked my aunt, what is your son-in-law's name? And she said, I don't know. We just call him Chinky boy, China boy. So to this day, we still call him China boy. When I wrote these stories and I used that word China boy, the editor from Penguin said to me, this is offensive. So I said, yes, I get it. I understand what you mean. But if you change it, you change the entire feeling of this story. It's not how Malaysian Indians speak. You know, we will say China boy. So I said, okay, to counter the stress that you are going to undergo as an editor, I will make it into dialogue. So, once it's dialogue, it belongs to the character. So to write in that way and to still be happy with what I write, I sometimes use dialogue as my escape.
So first English is an Asian language. It's an Indian language. It's a Singaporean language. Um, it maybe the problem arises that it's because we're using an upgraded iteration of English. We're not speaking English. We're speaking English 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. We have improved upon it and upgraded it and changed it according to our particular cultures. Just like in Malaysia, you've added your own particular inflections and flavors. So too famously, in places like Singapore, we have our Singaporean colloquial English or Singlish.
Singlish, Manglish, Taglish.
We all have our particular versions. And what's interesting, and this happens to all languages. I was talking to Yuri about Russian as used in Kazakhstan, and it means something very different. It's used differently from Russia. And that's okay. All languages do that. I think we need to get past the idea that it's a foreign language. It's not. I grew up with this, right? But a particular version of the language. What about you, Marga?
Yeah.
What's your thinking about it?
No, yes, no, you're absolutely right, and it's interesting because I'm sure we all use it differently, and you get, it was so difficult because I lived in London for 10 years when I was working with CNN, and then when I moved back to Asia, working for Al Jazeera in the Philippines, it reached a point where, because the Philippines has a very interesting way of using English, where it's an actual word, but it means something completely different. Like to salvage, right? What does it mean to you? Salvage something. In the Philippines, it's murder. Yeah, when they say somebody was salvaged, they chopped him up into little bits and pieces. No, I don't know. I have no idea where it came from. But it's sinalvage. That's what it's like the person was salvaged. But the word means to kill in a violent manner, So and when after maybe 2 years or 3 years that I was back there, and the cameraman I was sent with was British, the way we were speaking English had sort of shifted. So, and it was coming out in my scripts where at one point my British editor rang me up from Doha and said, this sentence, what exactly are you trying to say? I couldn't remember what I was trying to say. And I said, well, I'm saying this. Yeah, that's not how you say it in English. And I was like, what do you mean? And then he was like, no, and he was absolutely right. No, I was completely using it wrong because I had used it in the way that a Filipino would use it, that anybody else in the world who speaks English would not understand what I was saying.
But you know the Philippines has a larger population than the UK,
Yes,
right?
yes, no, but that's not the point. The point is it actually was wrong. Like if you think about it, they turned certain words where like there is no respect for any rules of grammar, you know, because of they're applying the rules of the Filipino language. So even pronouns, it's used in a very different way. So it can be very confusing, especially if you're in an international news channel where there is a standard.
I mean,
That's the
yeah.
difference.
So this is
you know?
why places like Singapore have a national campaign called the Speak Good English movement. You know about that? There's a website where you can go, and it's a national campaign. And you go to this website where you can learn how to pronounce English words properly, in the correct way. And you will find important English words that we use every day, like croissant and baguette and pizza and
Okay.
espresso.
Right.
Very, very English words.
Right, right, right.
Yeah, so I mean, you get the point. Languages evolve.
Yes.
Conventions evolved, and there is a sense in which, like my friends in India always say, you know, the ice cream is over. And it took me a while to understand what they meant by the ice cream is over. It means it's done, it's finished.
Right.
Right, it's empty.
Right.
They have evolved a particular way of
Yes.
using the language that's right for them,
Yes.
just like Malaysia has and Singapore
Very
has. But it speaks to a point that you're talking about, which is the international space.
Right.
And it's a question of legibility to
Yes.
whom. And I wanted to ask you a question related to this, which is, on the one hand, you say when you go out into the world and you're ambiguous, you are seen for who you are. My experience of that is actually the opposite, that when they can't, in the US anyway,
Right.
when they can't place you, you're invisible.
Oh, the U.S. is a whole different story.
Right.
that's
So-
that's a whole different story.
So could you speak
Yes,
to
yes,
that?
yes.
That on the and I think it's relevant to our cultures and languages. There is a sense in which in the so-called international space, if they can't fit you into the boxes they already have, you don't exist or they don't want you. Is it something you've experienced? Is it something that you work with, or what's your experience?
Mine is a little bit the exact opposite, because if they figure it out, then they'll ask you which part, you know, obviously I'm Indian. Then they'll ask, which part of India are you from? Are you north, south, east, west? And then, you know, what is your surname? What is your mother's name, father's name? And in the end, within 5 minutes, they will know somebody from somewhere. And in about 3 days, if I'm in UK, in 3 days, my father would have got a call. Oh, your daughter, we met your daughter. So, you know, the connections are so easy. I don't know whether any other Indians face it, but, you know, I can see quite a few people smiling because I think they experience the same thing. Come
This
anywhere.
is specific to the Indian community in
Yes,
Britain?
yes, everywhere. You know, my great grand uncle, someone, he had 16 children, and each of those 16 children had 6. So leave it. You know, we are somehow related. I have no doubt that if I were to stay here in a little while, somebody will come up to me and say, "Are you this person, this person, this person?" And I would maybe know somebody, and you know, we would be somehow related. You know, so it's and then the exact opposite. So.
For me, actually, the experience in the US is that I'm an Indian. Wherever I go, I'm an Indian.
Right.
If I wear the beard, I'm a Pakistani. If not, I'm an Indian.
Right.
And most of the parts the same. But in France, it's very different. The moment I open my mouth, I'm Malgache.
Oh.
I'm coming from Madagascar.
Right.
Because
Right.
that's the only way that they could relate. Somebody looking like me speak French.
Right.
And then in both languages, I think in French and English, I have a very unique accent that doesn't belong to anywhere. And then I think I love that space of ambiguity. And that comes in my characters as well.
Yes.
Because the way people, you know, perceive you and the way they are lost in that space of ambiguity, I play a lot that in my writing.
Right.
And I think that that is present everywhere.
I identify with that
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
crave the invisibility that you talk of. So I think through my writing, I choose to find it, through the characters. They can't. They're Indian. There's nothing invisible.
That's very, very cool. What's
Yeah.
your experience, Marga? You were saying the US is a very different place.
No, that's a whole different
Say
story
no
because
more.
the States, well, yeah, no, because they
Yeah.
have very set ways of,
Yeah.
they're just going to put you in the box regardless. They think you're one thing and that's it, and you will
Yeah.
be treated accordingly. Whereas everywhere else, they will even ask you the questions. In the States, they don't ask you questions, they just presume.
Yeah.
So because I work greatly, it was mostly in Europe, Latin America, and the Middle East. It was a whole different story because you don't have the same kind of uh, judgment or
Yeah.
prejudices that you might in the United States. It's a completely different kettle of
I love
Sorry.
I love what Aneeta and you were saying about, in a sense, we want to stay emerging. We want to continue to be fluid and ambiguous because we find a comfort in that. We find a sort of slippery flexibility in that. You're saying your characters revel in that. You make use of that rather than fight against that.
Yeah, I mean, I often wonder what is emerging, and from where we are emerging, first of all, because our voices, I mean, they were there and they are there, they will be there. But what I feel whenever I hear this word emerging is that, okay, now they are ready to listen to us. That's what I pick. So we are being heard, or somebody is ready to listen to us. I don't know. That's what I feel. But I don't think that this word even, I mean, should even be used. Emerging. It doesn't have, you know, it doesn't have anything tangible. It's like the invisibility that we long for, probably.
Well, I think no. What comes with the ambiguity, right, is the constant reinvention. It's like with every project that I take on with the book, the manuscript, they're all different. Another author here where her books also every book you pick up is like it was written by somebody else, right?
I do
Yeah.
that too.
Yes.
Because I always, I mean, for me, what is most challenging is that what I love to do, to set stories in the cultures that are not known to me. So I go there, I live there, I mingle with people, and I just stay in the public places and write for years and years.
Yes.
and and I see all of these the changing patterns in society and interactions with me and all of these things, they give me inspirations.
Very
And
much.
I think yeah, I mean, that's very enriching experience.
How do you feel? I was just curious because, as you were saying, right, it's to go to these places, get to know them, get to know the people, understand the situation that they're living in, and all of that. How do you feel about this whole own voices movement? Own voices, right? It's this
Own
thing where, like,
voices.
yeah, the own voices that you have to be of a particular background to write about that space. Because in that case, like Shakespeare wouldn't have written Romeo and Juliet, because what would he have known about teenage, people from? Yes, exactly. So I mean, yes.
I mean, for me, the first thing is, when I go to a place, I don't have a story in my head. I observe something, and then
Comes.
I start writing bits and pieces,
Right.
and then get them amalgamated. But in the process,
Right.
I think I don't write to please anybody. Number one, and the integrity to the story comes from the longing that I want to write something that I want to read
Right.
about the community, about the people
Yes.
I see and I interact with. And, and when I do that, when I'm in that creative process, I really don't, feel that, the need to please an external force or anybody. And I write it unapologetically,
Yes.
and in that process, I think, I don't really cater any movement, or I don't really try to write for any more movement, or do advocacy for anything.
Right.
To follow through with yours. When I write, it's not for anyone too, that happens, but there is a bliss that comes. There is a moment, I'm not sure about you, when you write, and there is a moment when you go into the zone and it just appears. And so when you say your own voice, sometimes I wonder whether it's Aneeta's voice or the voice from within, or where does it come from? And after some time you leave it and you read it, and it's very emotional, and I find what I've also noticed, which gladdens my heart, is that the parts where I write and I cry, my readers will cry. When they say to me, sometimes I've been scolded, you wrote a story and you made me cry. So I just skip that and I ask them, which part did you cry? And they think a bit, and then I realize that the part that I cried writing is the part that they cry reading. So did my voice transmute that? Who knows?
Two things. One is, I think writers are people for whom writing is really, really difficult. I'm not the first person to say this. And for a poet, I think it's particularly difficult because I don't know if it's a self-imposed kind of standard, but I kind of want every book to be completely different from the book before, which makes it really, really difficult to write, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is because I'm so busy worrying about that and trying to sort of outdo myself in whatever sense of what outdo means, I really don't have time to go around ticking boxes and pleasing people. I write to see for myself what it is I care about and I'm thinking about. And if I worry about offending, and that doesn't mean one is reckless or irresponsible with words, but also no one should be sheltered from criticism. And if one's work is said or put out there as honestly or as clearly or as well crafted as one believes one can do, we do our best basically. And if someone still isn't satisfied with it or takes offense with it, which has happened to me, it's like, so be it. Criticism is about the expression of a need that has not been met. It may not be our intention to meet that need. It's like, okay, I take that as a point of data, noted, thanks for telling me. Life goes on. But I think that movement comes from a different history, right? I don't think it comes from our history. It comes from a history of a particularly dominant culture being in the habit of taking other people's stories and making it their own. And by that I mean ChatGPT, of course. But also the idea in which this ongoing narrative of artificial intelligence models appropriating content and then just sort of commercializing it, I think sits on top of a much longer and deeper history of appropriation. There's a whole conversation and politics around that. I don't think anyone's sort of immune from accusations of any kind, but we must speak from our own consciences. And that conscience and that imagination should very well require us to sometimes put ourselves into other people's shoes. How can one be empathetic without doing that?
And a bit, something to add to that. Just a question. This sense of vulnerability when you finish something, I think that is the drive. You know that you will be criticized, and you know that you will get fireballs. That means you have done something that wakes people out, and you know that just kick the people out of their beds. It's not intending to hurt somebody, but writing for waking the people up. It's a part of writing, I think. So I always, expect criticisms, and I love that, the euphoria of vulnerability. That's very, yeah.
That's a nice. I'm going to write that down and not quote you and say it's my word. You know where it will come from.
We wanted to open the floor to questions. So if anybody or if there's anything anybody would like to. Yes.
You just said that we have a long history of appropriation, and you connect it with ChatGPT, generative AI. A lot of IPR is stolen by the ChatGPT, generative AI, from Wikipedia, newspapers, from everywhere it is stealing data. So data has reached a data peak. No further data. Everything is amalgamated by ChatGPT because it is reached such a point, no further data. Then how DeepSeek can go forward? Please answer.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how DeepSeek does it. I'm not actually an AI expert. It is a very serious problem, partly because, well, for one thing, one difference between what DeepSeek appears to be trying to do and what ChatGPT appears to be trying to do is DeepSeek is open source, and ChatGPT you have to pay a subscription, which I refuse to pay. The other thing is there are organizations and governments, like in Singapore, that are actively encouraging writers, for example, to give our work to these language models to be put into their database. And a lot of people have said no. And in fact, some of them have found out that their work is in ChatGPT's models without permission. So this is an ongoing and I think very serious issue and question. And I think it's not about how knowledge can and should be shared. It's about how knowledge can and should be owned and limited for use. Because they're basically taking it and selling it. That's a different conversation, I think, from reading a book and then seeing what one can do with it.
Sir, this is to Brabit. Sir, you said that the ambiguity, you use the space of ambiguousness for fiction. Then it means that fiction is close to poetry because there is 7 types of ambiguity, just like William Emerson has written on that. So all the fiction the world over is coming closer to poetry because you embrace ambiguous.
I think the difference between, I'm also exploring the difference between the prose and the the poems, because sometimes what we write can be read poetically. I just found out a few hours ago. But I think that the ambiguity is a bigger space, where the space that sometimes you don't know and it's obscure and it's easy to play. But when it comes to fiction, I believe that the fact that I chose fiction too is that I can tackle with the fictions the reality of the fiction we live in a way that in a product that people can stomach better and easily, because people love to read fictions and people enjoy fiction. I'm not talking about the modern time that we are overwhelmed by the information and we are obsessed trying to find out the facts in the fictions. But when you present something bitter in a sweeter way, it's easy to digest and easy to stomach. Thank you. I think I replied to you.
My question is to Marga. Of course, it is a difficult thing to capture the culture of the native people. But when you are writing in another language, how do you pay justice to the native speakers?
Sorry, to the linguistics?
Yeah, especially when you capture the culture of a particular sect of people, say for instance in Malaysia and all over. You are writing in a foreign language, then how do you give justice to those native speakers?
Yes. What I try to do is, particularly like in my latest book, which is here in the bookstore, called God's Ashes, it goes across many cultures because I try to capture an entire epic saga across the Pacific Islands. So everything from Malaysia, Sabah in Malaysia, all the way across the Philippines, Brunei, including Taiwan, all the way to the Marshall Islands. So what I try to do is, because in all of those places, there is a different way that English is spoken. So I tried, because I have visited many of the places that I represent in the book, so I'm speaking from what I remember, from the experience that I had of those places and the people that I met. I tried to capture the way they might speak in a way that will translate in English for other people to understand. And then I contextualize it in what I put around the dialogue. So I also then will pepper that occasionally with actual local language. So it will be peppered throughout the book. So somebody might be speaking in English, and then it will lapse into a word or two, or perhaps a sentence in their local language that will then get contextualized and translated afterwards. It isn't easy, and it's sometimes the hardest part of it, but I try to stay as true to the culture that I'm trying to talk about as I can, because I don't want it to also come across like one generic story in English, and because people will speak English differently, as you see even here on the stage. So that's what I tried to do, particularly in that last novel, because it goes across so many different countries. You know, it was easier, obviously, when the first novel is set in a fictionalized Philippines. So I just had to represent different sections of economic status, because even that is different. You will have some language that is in English peppered with Spanish, and then you will have the English that is peppered with the Filipino dialects, and then you will have, you know, still another language that is just a dialect from a very remote province, you know, that is different as well. So I try very much in my dialogue and conversations to reflect that, because it shows, I think, a lot more the status of the character in terms of the economy of the place, the status in terms of the culture, and how they relate with the other people. Very much I'm aware of that. So.
How has Asian literature emerged over the past 50 years or 100 years? And do you still think West dominate the literature field rather than Asian?
So the question is, the last bit of your question is, does Asian dominate?
No, does the West dominate the literature field?
Sure.
And how has the Asian literature emerged over the past 50 or 100 years? How has the journey been?
Okay. The journey has been interesting. Okay, one of the things that I think all of us face is that when we write a story, it is, all right, for the novel, let me give you the best example is the novel. It is a story, in one sentence, it's about a family that is torn apart because the husband converts to Islam. And without the knowledge of the wife converts their child as well. And I live in Malaysia where it's concurrent. Sharia and the civil law are both official jurisdictions, and they are both practiced at the same time. Yes, there's an enormous amount of confusion going on. So now, when I wrote this novel, first of all, I had submitted it to an agent in the UK, and she signed me on. But she insisted that I change the whole thing, and the basic thing that she told me was, you must make sure that the mother fights this in court. So I said, that doesn't work. You know, everybody, the whole drama is the fact that it's happened, and we have to deal with it. If you ask me to go and create a scene, first of all, it doesn't exist. You know, that is really fiction. And I said, as a lawyer, my friends are going to laugh at me. So how did I have to counter it? I had to withdraw, because there was a dominance, you know. So it wasn't published in the UK. I withdrew and I did it. It took a lot, so I did it myself. I mean, it has succeeded, and I'm very grateful that it has succeeded. So has it changed? Yes, in my experience, the West still dominates, but the number of Asian writers is growing. So there is confidence, there is growing in numbers, we support each other, there are festivals like this, so that helps. You know, but yes, if you ask me to give you a very lawyer-like answer, yes or no, I will say yes. You know, West does dominate still, unfortunately. It's changing, but it still dominates. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
So I'm going to compare the term emerging voices in literature to something which is used often in economics, which is emerging markets, right? And the term emerging markets seems to imply that the standard to which economy should aspire to is a standard of a developed, so-called developed economy. And I believe just using that phrase, emerging market, in a multinational corporation itself creates a sort of imbalance. It's a very subtle way I sense of putting down economies which, in terms of its purchasing power as well as market size or innovation or any of those attributes, could be much more meaningful than a static economy which is labeled as developed. So my question is there a parallel between that same thinking? Did emerging markets come first and then did emerging everything else follow? And do you feel there is that same sense of imbalance, a sort of subtle putting down everything that comes from Asia and elsewhere as by terming it emerging?
Yes.
Yes. But it's changing. The thing is the emerging, it hasn't emerged, finished the emerge. We're still emerging. So I would say it's continuous and it's, what's the word in economics? The trajectory is rising. I think is that the right word? So it's not a sine curve, it's just going upwards.
For me, I would say I will repeat that our voices were always there. They are always here, and they will be there. And I'm wondering where we are emerging from, and is for me it's the readiness to listen to us has come. It's time. That's what we say is changing currents, and I mean a century that is ahead of us for us, and other than that, I don't see any meaning in this word. Thank you.
Emerging also to me is learning, because in some ways I learn about my own. Again, going back to my story, and I could not understand why there was such an opposition to what I wanted to tell. And when the editor said to me, at one point she said to me, "What's the problem? Just if the mother has converted, why don't you just get the mother to revert, or the father to just revert?" It hit me like a ton of bricks that actually we have no choice. And then that informed my work as to, it became the focus, the desire to choose, the ability to choose. Can a woman choose? Can a man choose? So that I look at emerging as also learning. So if you ask me emerging markets, economy, same thing, we're learning. I learn about how to do things in a better way. I learn what's good about theirs, I learn what's bad about theirs. I think it's a learning.
I think there are advantages. Before the term emerging markets became popular, remember we used to say developing economies? And you remember places, Singapore was dying to stay within the label of a developing economy long after it became affluent. Why? We got discounts for still being developing, right? Nobody actually wanted to convert to developed status except for the bragging rights, because if you stayed within developing, you could continue to learn, you could benefit from technical assistance, you got subsidies, so on and so forth. So there's a pragmatic way in which being emerging can be used to one's advantage, as long as one is confident enough to understand that we've always been around. Our stories have long been around. Whether people want to hear us or not, whether we want to read each other and listen to one another's voices or not, that is something that continues to grow and that we need to build on. But there's a way in which we can use this label that is, let's not kid ourselves, meant to be derogatory and dismissive, but we could use that to our pragmatic advantage, and there's something in there that perhaps we can make use of and think about.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I agree with you partially, because I think also, when you look at this word emerging, if we buy it fully, I think there's a danger of learned dependency. So, I don't want us to be in that category, because learned dependency is something that I've been witnessing throughout my humanitarian career. And when I hear that on this stage about writing, it scares me out.
A good audience question is one that makes the panel disagrees with one another. So that was brilliant. Any other questions, please? Please, please.
As he has mentioned of the emerging market, if an economy is in a takeoff stage, there's a theory called big push theory. If somebody is there to push it, it will soon soar up and progress. Is there any kind of, from the part of publishers, from the part of translators, any such big push in the emerging literature, Asian literature?
Is your question about publishers pushing our work? Is that what you mean? Sorry, can you...
Just as they push the writers from the West.
So
Similar
the publishers push the writers from the
no,
West?
No, they publish mostly of the Western writers, as you said, they dominate.
Right. They
Similarly,
dominate, but they also support us.
yeah.
So there is, again, emerging. I think it's changing. Like he said, the time is right. So there is a hunger for writers from Asia. Their work is accepted. It needs to be worked on. The challenge sometimes is having to make what we know so inherently and so within ourselves communicated in a way that someone who doesn't know anything about us understands what we are saying. So that, I think, is working. There is a publisher's push from the West. But it's hard because they've never been. You know, these are editors sometimes from the West who don't even know. They'll just tell you Asia, and they don't know that Asia is so huge. They've never stepped outside England. So for me to make what we are saying palatable to them, for them to understand, I do need to do the work as well. You know, it's not easy, it's both. Yes, I hope that answers your question. Yeah. See, there's a lady there who wants a question. Okay. She's been waiting quite patiently.
Just shout it.
I don't think.
It's not a question as such. I would like to say, I mean, ma'am, you already answered my question. It is not emerging, it's like accepting, you know? Like emerging, the society is emerging because the people are more literate, they started reading things, and they started reading the work and they started understanding, so they could relate to what they feel and they couldn't voice it. So the voice, when it comes from the eminent personalities who are writing, the writers or the authors, so you are being accepted. So there comes the emerging part. So I also agree with sir that it's not emerging. Is it acceptance from the society towards you? And another thing is, the question I wanted to ask you was like, is it challenging to write more? Because you are being accepted, so you are so many writers and so many poets. So the work how do you think about writing? So the other person, I should be better than the other one, or my work should be accepted, recognized. So does that thought comes into you? Than the voice.
Okay.
Yes.
Answer.
Thank you so much for that. To add to that, I would like to, highlight this. So when we are accepted, we should really, we should not provide these exotic materials, but we provide materials that, make them accept the diversity we have and accept the, differences we have. Because, there are a lot of market space for the exotic materials, but it's not what we should sell.
Okay. What?
Some of my work is in the Cambridge O and A level exam papers. On the one hand, you'll be like, yay, that's what it really means to become famous as a writer. You become an exam paper, right? I have friends in Botswana who come and say, I hate you, my kid had to, analyze your poem and nobody gets it. That's on one level, there's that. On the other hand, I think any writer with self-respect always wants to do better and doesn't want to only be remembered for the work that they did and that they were famous for 20 years ago, right? So one is always emerging from the shell of one's own past. and this is separate from the politics of all these other things. And there's a way in which we're always trying to renew ourselves and always trying to be reborn as writers in any kind of way. And I think that's an ongoing challenge that we have to answer for ourselves.
In the challenge is also a solution, so you work towards it. And when it's writing, it's not work, it's enjoyable, it's a discipline, it's so on and so forth. There is, the word challenge sounds very negative. Actually, it's not. It becomes positive in the process, but you have to work through it. So does that answer your question in some? Okay.
I will just wrap it up before we turn back and finish. But as I'm sure all of you agree, I mean, for me, writing, I don't mean to sound overly dramatic, but writing is like breathing. I almost don't know who I am if I'm not writing. It just is. It's seriously. And when I'm not writing, I feel like I'm not myself. So I think that's it. Thank you.